Alright, so this section is called Factoring, Solving Equations and Inequalities. So this first question asks you, it's actually out of section 0.6, it asks you to factor out a common term. So 8, 160, and 4, they all have a 4 in common. And you don't have 3 A's, you don't have 3 B's, and you don't have 3 X's involved in all three terms, so that's all you can factor out is a 4. You can always check it, multiply 4 times each of these to get these above terms. Same thing here, these all have at least a 4, they all have at least one Y, and they all have at least one Z. So when you pull out a 4, a Y, and a Z, you get 3 Y squared. That's it. Pull out a 4, a Y, and a Z, you get just a Z. Pull out a 4 out of there, you get a 2. A Y out of Y squared, you get a Y. A Z out of Z cubed, you get Z squared. Number 5, they ask you to factor it by grouping. So you factor something out of the first two terms, which is a 6. Factor something out of the last two terms, which is a Y. And now you can pull a x minus m out of both of them, and you get 6 plus y. Okay? And then this one, number 7, x squared plus 8x plus 12, that's x times x, 6 and 2. Could have gone with 3 and 4, but we'll see. Again, the larger this number is, the farther apart you want the numbers to be. 3 and 4 would be more accurate if this was like a 1 or a 2. But because it's 8, which is pretty close to the 12 in size, I'm picking numbers that are further apart, 6 and 2. Alright, so you get x squared, 12. You get 6x and 2x is 8x. Okay. And then number 10, x squared is x and x. 20 can be 1 and 20. There's a bunch of choices. I tried 1 and 20. Both had to be negative because of a positive 20. And you need to add up to a negative 21, so they both had to be negative. Minus 1x and minus 20x adds up to minus 21x. Now 14, 4y squared is 2y and 2y. 9 is 3 and 3. Let's check to make sure our middle term adds up. That's 6y, and 6y adds up to 12y. Okay? And finally, number 19, x. Take an x out of 4x squared, it's just 4x. Take an x out of x, and it's just 1. Okay? Number 20. You factor a 2 and an x cubed out of both these guys, and you're left with x squared plus 9, which you think maybe that factors. But it doesn't. That's the sum of squares. We do not have a factoring rule for sum of squares. We have a factoring rule for difference of squares, which you'll see later. 2x squared minus 8x minus 42, you factor out a 2. Makes this thing a bit easier to work with. X and x, 7 and 3. You could have tried 1 and 21. Alright, so that's minus 7x, and that's positive 3x, which gives you negative 4x. Okay, so now what about this guy? X cubed minus 16x squared plus 64x. I pull an x out of each of these, leave me with this. Now I say x squared is x and x, 64 is 8 and 8. Check my middle term, 8x, and 8x adds up to 16x. Now that can also be written as this, x plus 8 squared, with an x in front. It doesn't matter which way you write it. I don't think the computer would mark either one wrong. I wouldn't. Alright, factor out a 4. And what do you got here? You got x squared minus 2x minus 15. So that's x and x. That's 3 and 5. Plus 3 and minus 5 adds up to minus 2. Notice with the minus 15, you got to make one negative and one positive. You don't know which one, so just try one. Okay? If you get an answer that's opposite of the one you want, if you got like positive 2x, all you have to do is flip the signs and you'll get the right answer. Alright, now this one, this is the difference of squares. It may not be obvious, but 16z squared is 4z times 4z. And 81w squared is 9w times 9w. So now if you got two things that are squared, you just write each one with a plus and a minus, and you're done. 39, you're going to have to do that twice here. On 39, y to the fourth is y squared times y squared. 16x to the fourth is 4x squared times 4x squared. So you got y squared, 4x squared, plus and minus. Now they want you to make the mistake here of factoring this, which is the sum of squares. Don't factor that. But this one is factorable, right? That's y times y. That's 2x times 2x. So y2x, plus and minus. You're done. That's all it takes. Okay, now number 40. X to the 8th minus 81, that's x to the 4th plus 9, x to the 4th minus 9. Difference of squares. Again, don't mess with this one, but this one does factor again. X squared 3, plus and minus. And you got it. Now this last one's a little tricky just because of the way they show it on the computer. They have this little box, tiny little box right next to this thing, and it's not easy to understand that they want a whole big expression like this inside that box. What they want you to do is to pull a 2x to the 1/4 out of each one of these guys. Well, when you pull a 2x to the 1/4 out of 2x to the 1/4, you're left with 1. When you pull a 2 out of a 4, you're left with a 2. Now here's the tricky part. When you pull an x to the 1/4 out of an x to the 3/4, you're left with x to the 1/2. Remember, multiplying bases, you add the exponent. So x to the 1/4 times x to the 1/2 is 1/4 plus 1/2, or 3/4. Okay, so one is a bit tricky. Now those are all from chapter 0 review. This is from section 1.1. They ask you to solve. So get rid of your parentheses. 8 times x, 8 times 1. Now let's bring everything that's a variable to the left by subtracting 8x. Let's bring all our constants to the right by subtracting 8. And then break up multiplying by -7 by dividing by -7. And you get x equals 0. Okay? And then number 5. There's several ways you can do number 5. You can solve it in 2 steps. You could multiply both sides by 4 and then divide by -3. But I did it in 1 step just to show you there's other ways to do it. I multiplied -3/4 times its reciprocal, -4/3. And that gives you 12 over 12, which is just 1x. Okay, and then 24 times 4/3, the 3 cancels with the 3, leaving me with an 8 times 4, or 32, -32. Okay, and then this guy, 2 times x, 2 times 7, 5 times x, 5 times 3, alright, you're left with 2x minus 14, you have to put 14x plus 15, okay, so subtract 4x, and add 14, divide by -2, and you got your answer. Number 10, 3 times x minus 4, 4 minus 2 times x plus 2. So you multiply the 3 times each of these, you multiply the 2 times each of these. Okay, don't subtract these first, because you got to do multiplication before you do subtraction, order of operations. So 3x minus 12, 4 minus 2x minus 4, those two cancel out. So now let's bring the 2x to the left and let's bring the 12 to the right. Divide by 5 and you get 12/5. Okay, now in this one, common denominator of 6. Multiply each guy by 6. This gives you 30 over 2, or 15. That gives you 24. And your 6 is completely canceled, even with just the numerator. Okay? So now here I want to move my x's to the left by subtracting 2x, constants to the right by adding 24. Well, that leaves me with 13x and positive 17. Get rid of the times 13 by dividing by 13, and you get your answer. Okay, 33 asks you to solve the inequality. Okay, so you multiply by 3, and you get rid of parentheses. Subtract 2, add 3, and you're left with x is less than 2. Okay, now 35. You want the x's on the left, so let's subtract 1. Divide by -2, and when we do, we flip the inequality sign. Alright, now 49. It's a word problem. They give you the total cost in a formula. The total cost equals 2x plus 79.20. Total revenue equals 20x. Now, by the way, these three numbers mean something. This means in front of the x for revenue, that means the price you're selling the item for. You're selling it for $20. This tells you how much it costs to make one, and this is the fixed cost you have to put up in order to start building or making the product, whatever it is. Now they want you to find the break-even point when total cost equals total revenue. So you set these two equal to each other, and when you solve, I subtracted 2x divided by 18, and I got 440. Now 56 is a bit more tricky, because 56 asks you two different situations. It says you got 4 grades plus your final, and you need to get an average of an 80 or above, so it needs to be greater than or equal to 80. And when you got 5 scores, you divide by 5 to get your average. Well, when you solve this, you add up these numbers, you get 292. You still have the plus x and the over 5. To get rid of the divided by 5, you multiply by 5. Okay? And now subtract 292, and you see that you need to get a score of 108 or higher. You need to get a score of 108 or higher. That's not possible. So what if the final exam is higher than 52? Well, if the final is higher than the lowest score, then you replace that lowest score with the score you got on the final. So these both would be the same score of whatever the final is. So now you've got a different equation to solve. You add these three together, you get 240. Multiply by 5 to get rid of the divide by 5. Subtract 240, divide by 2, and now you get an 80. So if you get an 80 or above, you'll pass with an 80 or above. Okay, number 61. They tell you the revenue is 40x, meaning you're selling the item for $40 each. The cost is 20x plus 1600, or $20 to make one, and you have to spend 1600 in fixed costs to make them. Okay, so they want to know when is revenue greater than cost. So when is R greater than C? So I throw in the values above in here, and I solve, and I get when x is greater than 80. So when you sell 80 of these items, you break even exactly. When you sell 81 or more, now you're making a profit, or your revenue is greater than your cost. Okay, that is section factoring, solving equations, and inequalities.